Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm so glad you're here. If you're new, my name's Julia, and this space is dedicated to exploring some really deep, complex, and often painful, but ultimately transformative topics. Here we talk about narcissistic abuse, spiritual awakening, cultic dynamics, and how all of these things are more interconnected than they might seem at first. Whether you've landed here out of curiosity, personal experience, or a desire to heal, you're in the right place. So today's topic is basically about when abuse becomes awakening. I want to dive into something that might sound a little unusual or even contradictory at first: the link between narcissistic abuse and spiritual awakening. And you might be thinking, why on earth would we talk about emotional abuse and narcissists in the same breath as something as expansive and beautiful as spiritual awakening? Well, that's exactly the paradox we're exploring today. And trust me, once you start to unpack, it does really begin to make a lot of sense. First, I want to make something really clear. Not everyone who experiences narcissistic abuse has a spiritual awakening. Everyone's healing path is different, and there's no right way to recover. What I'm talking about here is a very specific kind of experience that some people go through. It's not better or worse than other healing journeys, it's just different. For this group, the trauma of narcissistic abuse actually becomes a catalyst, a breaking point that triggers a major internal shift. Spiritual awakening can happen in all kinds of ways. Some people intentionally seek them out through practices like Kundalini yoga, deep meditation, breath work, or plant medicine journeys like ayahuasca. Others find themselves thrown into spiritual awakening without warning through illness, loss, heartbreak, or in this case, emotional abuse. The mechanics of awakening are layered and complex. And while we won't dive into the metaphysics of it all today, I want to focus on the emotional and energetic patterns that often lead survivors of narcissistic abuse into a spiritual rebirth. So, why do some people awaken after narcissistic abuse? This isn't really something you'll find in your average psychology textbook. You're unlikely to hear about it in traditional therapy sessions either. But in spiritual communities, on YouTube, in support groups, and personal accounts, this pattern keeps coming up, and it's something I've both personally experienced and seen reflected in many other people. The people that tend to have these awakenings are often empaths, light workers, highly sensitive people, spiritual seekers. Many of them grew up feeling different, like outsiders in their own families or communities. They might be the so-called black sheep, the chosen ones or healers. And while I don't fully subscribe to labels or hierarchical spiritual identities, I do think there's value in recognizing certain energetic and emotional tendencies in this group. These particular individuals often have an innate desire to help, to heal, to serve others. But here's the flip side. They're also more vulnerable to manipulation, gaslighting, and energetic vampirism, especially from narcissists. So, the big question: narcissists versus empaths. Is it a spiritual battle? Now, this might sound dramatic, but it often feels like there's a spiritual war happening beneath the surface of these toxic dynamics. Narcissists are deeply drawn to the light of empaths. And obviously, there's no way of scientifically gauging that, but it seems to be the case. And I'm not the first person by any means to say this on YouTube. And it's not because they want to bask in it, but because they want to control it. They want to extinguish it or feed off it. As many of you know, narcissists thrive off narcissistic supply, or what some other people like HG Tudor on YouTube call fuel. They seek admiration, attention, validation, and control. And empathetic people, especially those who haven't fully healed, often give these things freely because it's in their nature. But that's just one layer. On a deeper level, there seems to be something more spiritual at play. Some people describe narcissists as being energetic parasites or even possessed by dark entities. Others see them as merely wounded humans trapped in survival mode. Personally, I try and avoid seeing it as black and white, good versus evil, because it seems too dichotomous. But I do believe that there's a real energetic contrast happening, as in light versus shadow, empowerment versus control, soul expansion versus ego preservation. So the awakening begins in the breakdown, and this is where it gets profound. Narcissists have a way of activating the shadow in empaths. They mirror back all of the unhealed wounds, fears, and insecurities the empath may or may not know that they carry. And this is done through a variety of tactics, like manipulation, gaslighting, blame shifting, emotional chaos. They kind of trigger a sort of inner collapse in their victims. And for some, that collapse becomes the opening for something pretty powerful. When an empath begins to see the illusion, when they recognize the gaslighting, the lies, the trauma bonding, it can spark a massive internal shift. The veil lifts, and what's left behind is often a broken heart, shattered identity, and raw, vulnerable truth. And that's also where the awakening happens. The pain becomes the portal. And this journey is not easy. There's grief, rage, disillusionment, and deep inner work involved. But as the survivor begins to confront their trauma and set boundaries and reconnect with their true inner self, they start to awaken parts of themselves that were long buried. They begin to reclaim the inner child who never felt seen, the intuitive voice they silenced to keep the peace, the wild, powerful self that got tucked away to survive in dysfunctional environments. And slowly, they rise. Like a phoenix from the ashes, they begin to transmute pain into power, loss into purpose. They might be called to start creating art, healing others, speaking out, or diving deeper into their own spiritual path. Their pain becomes their purpose. And in my opinion, that is one of the most powerful forms of alchemy a human being can undergo. So if you've gone through or are going through narcissistic abuse and you feel like your world has completely turned upside down, take a breath. It's okay to feel lost. It's okay to feel angry, numb, or confused. But know this, you're not broken. In fact, something within you may be breaking open to reveal a deeper truth, a higher version of yourself, a soul mission you didn't even know you had. Your awakening may already be happening. And while the road from pain to empowerment is often long, messy, and non-linear, it's often one of the most liberating and life-affirming paths you can walk. Thanks so much for being here. If this resonated with you, please feel free to share your experience in the comments. We're building a community here, one rooted in truth, healing, and transformation. Until next time, take care of your energy, trust your path, and remember, your light is stronger than their shadow.